Julie Buntin's debut novel, Marlena, was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle's John Leonard Prize, and her novel In Progress won the 2019 Ellen Levine Fund for Writers Award. She teaches creative writing at the University of Michigan. And Rebecca Kauffman received her MFA in creative writing from New York University. She is the author of Another Place You've Never Been, which was longlisted for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize, The Gunners, which received the Premio Trabuc de Libre Award, hope I got that one, and The House on Fripp Island. Originally from rural northeastern Ohio, she now lives in Virginia. And of course, Chorus is an Indie Next pick for March. A starred review in Publishers Weekly said Kaufman's luminous latest showcases her knack for delving into the hearts of her characters, adding up to a superbly executed saga. So obviously we are thrilled to have Rebecca and Julie here in conversation today. So I'm going to go ahead and let you two get started, and I will be back in a bit for Q&A.
Thank you, Abby. I am really excited to get to interview Rebecca Kauffman today. Rebecca, I hope this isn't embarrassing to you. I think you already know this, but I'm like a really big fan of your work and have been since we were little babies in NYU's MFA program together. When you were writing beautiful, compelling, vivid, deeply moving stories, and you continue to do so at a rate so rapid, it like sort of scares me and makes me like deeply jealous, but we'll get to that later. And this new book is just as beautiful as the other three. I think to get us started, I would love just to hear, I mean, we heard a little bit about it in the introduction, and everyone can read the copy, of course, and we'll talk about what it's about, but I'd love to hear you talk about what it's about. There's something different hearing the author describe what the story means to them and how they came into it. So I'd love to hear that if you feel like sharing.
Thank you, Julie. I love you, Julie. This is such a treat to be here with you. Julie's one of my favorite writers and people in the world. This is such a treat. And thank you, Abby and other folks at RJ Julia for hosting us this evening. So Chorus is a book about 7 siblings whose mother is largely absent due to debilitating mental illness when she's alive, and then she dies when the children are all fairly young as well. So it is a story about an absence, and so of course then became a story about, you know, the various ways that we try and fill an absence or compensate for it. So that plays out very differently with the different siblings. You know, is it finding a life partner of one's own? Is it having children of one's own? Is it alcohol? Is it you know, some academic pursuit to try and intellectualize childhood trauma? And you know, do any of these things actually come even close to filling or even touching that loss, that absence, or are some losses so profound that they just gape wide open for a lifetime? So it's explored through the eyes of the 7 children and also their father, who is a survivor as well.
That was really beautifully put. I'm really glad that I asked you that and got to hear it from you. I think I'd love to hear a little bit of the book now that we've gotten that beautiful description of it. Maybe just a few pages or something from the opening, I think would be great to give us a sense of what it is.
Yeah, so I'll just read the first 3-ish pages here. A series of tornadoes tore eastward on May 2, 1929, touching down at locations all the way from Oklahoma to Maryland. The worst occurred in Rye Cove, Virginia, where a school building was yanked off the ground while the children were on noon recess. Desks made of oak and iron were tossed around like candy. A dumb rumor circulated about the wind sweeping feathers clean off the chickens at a neighboring farm and hair off the cows. The terrible reality was 12 dead children, though it took many hours of many fathers searching through debris to confirm this. The Shaw family lived 100 miles from Rye Cove and well outside of the storm's path. They experienced no impact. Jim Shaw learned of the tornado and the carnage days after it occurred from a neighbor who had listened to extensive coverage on the radio. Jim didn't discuss it with his wife nor any of his children. He carried and considered it silently as he went about his work that day, reinforcing the hog pen, training his filly for the harness, and dressing an infection near her eye. At dusk, Jim was returning the filly to her stall when his youngest son, Henry, came to him in distress. Henry was crying so hard he was drooling. The only word Jim could make out was hanging, or was it aching, or was it ringing? Jim's throat felt as though it was filling with sand, and he choked, "Where?" Henry pointed in the direction of the grove of tulip poplar trees where the children liked to play. Jim picked him up and headed that way, running. Henry was a sensitive boy, frightened by loud sounds and long shadows and chicken bones. So it was probably merely a dead squirrel or rabbit that Henry had found, Jim thought, or that one of the other children had a bloody nose. It was probably nothing. Yet Jim's heart was whacking at his eye sockets in sheer terror as he ran with his son. The sky was darkening overhead, but still ablaze on the horizon, the sun's flames licking up over the tree line. Jim ran faster, his son's knees and elbows clamped so tight around his belly and neck that Jim could hardly find air. When they neared the tulip poplars, Jim heard the awful thing before he saw it. He stopped running and stood still for a moment, panting. The screeching was sustained, almost with a melody, bird-like, but only sort of. Then he saw the flapping of wings, and in an instant, his whole chemical composition changed, adrenaline evaporating, muscles going loose and long, his entire body sagging with the sudden lethargy of deep relief. He set his son on the ground, said, "Wait here," and approached the scene. An owl, a tannish thing with white and gray accents, eyes ringed with gold, ear tufts large and cat-like. It shrieked as it rose and fell, lurching upward, then drawn back down, tethered to the ground by some force. When Jim drew nearer, he saw fur, then the full body of a weasel that was gripping the foot of the owl in its teeth. The weasel was small, a juvenile, and each time the owl lifted off the ground in an attempt to fly away, it did so with a bit of success. The weasel was partially lifted off the ground, too, its torso stretching long, but body still anchored to the ground by its hind legs, hanging, like Henry had said. Jim sucked in his breath and moved closer. He'd heard owls in the night and seen evidence of weasels in the morning, but had never actually laid eyes on either of these mysterious night hunters, and never could have imagined this bizarre warfare taking place before him. The owl's panic intensified with Jim's approach. It screamed and flapped harder, yet the two animals remained locked together. Jim took a few more steps forward. Behind him, Henry howled. The weasel turned its head to glower at Jim. When it registered the size of his figure, it released its hold on the owl's foot and darted off into the dark grass. The liberated owl flew up into the dark trees. It disappeared into their shadowy boughs, then emerged above the tree line and soared in large circles. Jim was transfixed and allowed himself to be moved by beauty. The freedom and dignity of the owl's flight filled him with such awe that for a bit he was so lost he wouldn't have known his own name. Henry joined his father soon, placing his warm, damp hand in Jim's. He said, "I didn't want to see a dead thing." Jim said, "I'm glad you didn't have to." "I thought that was the only way it could possibly end," Henry said.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was beautiful. I haven't returned to that opening since I finished the book, and there's like something just in hearing how it chimes against the ending that's so devastating and perfect and chilling and great. So, I have like an endless cascade of questions for you, but I think the thing that I most want to start with is a kind of structural question, which I hope isn't boring for the audience, but is really interesting to me, which is just, this book is sort of pieced together almost as like a kaleidoscope of different stories from the siblings' lives. And actually there's another character who has a story too. And I guess I'm just very curious as a writer, how you came into this and kind of why you started where you did and how you put the shape of this family's life together through these discrete pieces, and sort of how you thought about, I know this is a big question, like which moments you were going to zero in on and which you were going to leave out. Yeah.
So generally speaking, it is a collection of linked short stories. each story is supposed to have an arc of its own. And I think I sort of made my way to that somewhat intuitively, because there are aspects of both short stories and the novel that I'm really addicted to. Short stories, I love how they typically hinge on a single moment, that the character may not understand its significance, but typically the reader does. And also, kind of the economy of language that's usually required to accomplish something in only a few pages. But then I'm also completely addicted to the long scope of the novel and just the amount of depth and interiority that I think you can really only achieve over the course of several hundred pages. So this structure, appeals to me for that reason. I get to sort of play around with both. And also I really enjoy constructing endings. And I realize in my second and third novel, which were pretty traditionally structured narratives, I was depriving myself of my great love of endings.
We got one ending per book.
And in this one, I got, I don't even know, like 20-ish chapters I give them. And it is a great joy for me to consider and then land on an ending. All that being said, I didn't set out to write a book from 7, 8, or 9 different points of view, and with all of these varying timelines. It's just what came up and out. And I'm actually a little bit reluctant to say which story and which. What's that?
I really want to know which one came first.
Really? I don't.
Yeah, you don't have to tell us here. Maybe you can tell me later. Unless if it would ruin the magic. But it's interesting because they're all, it's got that kind of like quality of like the baton passing from character to character, which is so beautiful in any kind of novel with multi POV. Except as you fall into it, you kind of wonder, like, is it going to be Henry? Is it going to be Jim? Is it going to be Henry? Is it going to be Wendy? And it's sort of, it's beautifully and profoundly and powerfully everyone. But it's super interesting to me to think that it might not have always been that way.
Yeah, my reluctance to talk about like the first story that I wrote or character that I conceived of is that it's not my favorite story or my favorite character.
Interesting.
But what's that?
That's interesting. It's like maybe you had to like find another character to like address the things that weren't satisfying you about the one.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I'll just go ahead and say it. So Wendy is the first character that I conceived of. I just had this spark of an idea for an oldest sibling who cares for the younger ones.
Yeah.
When the mother is struggling with this illness that 100 years ago wasn't even necessarily widely recognized as an illness at all. And she has no ailment or injury that any of the children can exactly name. And yet their eldest sibling is so competent and so naturally fulfills the role of caretaker in the family. And I didn't know quite what to do with Wendy because I first envisioned her as a young teenager and resenting this role that she felt was imposed on her. And yet she was so good at it. And for a long time, I was stuck on the idea that she was just, counting down the days until her siblings would leave and she could, live the life that she really wanted to live. And eventually I realized that didn't feel true to me. That didn't feel right for her character. And she comes to deeply, deeply grieve the empty nest scenario that she eventually finds herself in. But yeah, I've got to say, it's hard for me to trace back a decision about structure to any point. I've been trying really, really hard with this book in particular, and sort of this point in my writing career I've been trying to think about and figure out what my brain is actually doing when I'm writing. I don't have any idea.
Yeah.
Do you?
I don't know. I have to talk about it a lot for teaching. I wonder if you do too. And sometimes I think it's funny. I said this in class the other day. I was like, if I ever like walk off into the sunset and you like never see me in a classroom again, it's because at the end of the day, like all I really think about this is that you just like do it as well as you can and as true as you can. And there's like kind of nothing else to say. But there's like also so many other things to say. But of course, I don't really truly believe that, right? Like there had to be a point when you looked at the draft and you were like, okay, this story goes here, this one goes here. Maybe I wrote it intuitively, but I'm going to like put a little pressure on like what I put on the page and say like, does it hold up to what I'm trying to do? But yeah, I mean, it's the constant tension, right? Of like, we can talk about it, but what happens when you're writing is not verbal, even though it's totally verbal.
Right. It's completely mysterious to me still. I was curious how you would answer that. And I'm curious, like, it would make sense to me that a writer would either be always writing towards something, like looking at some point that they want to reach, whether it's the end of a scene or an end of a chapter, or even a moment, or a metaphor or a joke, like that you're always writing towards something. And I do have that sense sometimes, or that maybe a writer's always kind of looking backwards and thinking about what's been written and trying to make sure that there's consistency and coherence. Either or both would make sense to me intellectually, and yet that's not my experience. My experience is that my mind is a black block when I'm writing.
You come out at the end and you're like, book.
And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But the only sort of like consistent thing that I can say about it and about decisions as big as structure, and as small as word choice, are that over and over and over again in my head, I'm thinking, not with these words, but does this work? Does this work? Does this work? And it's like an old-fashioned Rolodex is just like, spinning the whole time. But the mystery is like, what does it mean if something works or doesn't? I have no idea.
You feel like you have an idea once it's done? Like, can you like read it and the Rolodex goes like, like do over? Or do you need like another reader to tell you, or an editor?
I think deep inside, I usually know when something is a dud. Prior to writing Chorus, I spent about 2 or 3 years writing a book that was a dud. So my third book sold in 2018 and didn't come out till 2020, and so I spent those 2 years working on something that was just not good. It was not good, and it was not getting better. And in my heart of hearts, I knew it, but I did need a little bit of a nudge from my agent, Michelle, who is magnificent. She knows my work so well. And, she read far too many drafts of that bad book. And in hindsight, something was wrong, but I needed to kind of be nudged away from that project. And then Chorus. So I started Chorus in March or April of 2020. So right when the pandemic hit, and that was when I finally kicked that last project to the curb, and suddenly had this tremendous amount of energy and adrenaline for something new. And the first draft came out very quickly. And I think the sort of hopeful thing about that, or takeaway, would be, those years that I was working on that bad book, it was not time wasted. Like something inside of me was hard at work, just not on that. Have you had that experience?
Yeah, that's such a beautiful, like, hopeful thing to hear you say. I've been working on my second book for forever, and part of the reason I've been working on it for forever is because I wrote most of a whole other book that was a piece of utter horrible badness. And the difficult thing now is that I wonder sometimes if the book I'm working on now is also that. Like, the idea that I could have done that twice is like real overwhelming. But that's a side conversation. But I do think that's right. Like, you're learning something even when you're messing up and failing. And it doesn't feel like it at the time, but I hope it informs something later. I guess, and forgive me for this being kind of a personal question, but I think you'll let me ask it because it's something we've talked about a little bit. So you you became a mother when was Angus born in relation to Chorus being written? I guess Angus was like,
yeah, he was born in August of 2020.
Right. So you finished the draft before Angus was born? Oh, you did,
yeah.
Didn't you?
I what?
I remember now that I knew that.
Yeah. So I started Chorus when we had just started to very seriously quarantine and everything. Yeah. Was like, there's all this scary upheaval. At which point I was also entering my second trimester, which was like a very like comfortable and lovely and energetic time for me. And yeah, he's my first child, and I just had this like, it was just a swirl of emotion surrounding the anticipation of his life, and fear for the world and the future of our family. It was just like a very bizarre confluence of circumstance at that time. But I just had this swell of just love of family, but things never translate for me directly onto the page in terms of what I'm experiencing and most deeply, because I was at the time a very joyful expectant mother, and this book is not about a joyful expectant mother.
It's actually so interesting though to think about where you were in your life as you wrote this. Like it's interesting. I mean, and forgive me if I'm reading too much into it, but like to have started this book pregnant with your first child, and it being so much about like siblings and the relationship between siblings, obviously with this absent mother being like the kind of catalyst for all of their lives in different ways. But like, it's a story, I think I really reveled in like the siblingness of it, like those bonds and that connection and that kind of love. But then you have your son and then you become a mother, like, but you're still working on the book, you're editing it, you're submitting it. I guess I'm curious, like, did your relationship to it change as that change happened in your life at all? Or did it cause you to think about anything differently? Or were you able to kind of like say, this is this project and where it is? And does that make sense?
Yeah, I think my relationship with the book changed only in the sense that it became more precious to me, not in terms of the content, but in terms of the association with what was happening in my life. And it is interesting to me now to think that, it's really not a book about motherhood at all. Mm-hmm. As you said, it's a book about the sibling bond first and foremost. And to me, that's always been really fascinating. Statistically speaking, a sibling is, that relationship is most likely to cover the largest span of your life, with many, many exceptions, of course. But you're likely to lose your parents several decades before you go. Your life partner is likely to not enter your life until you're a couple decades in, your own children as well. Lifelong friendships are incredibly rare. So again, many exceptions, but the sibling relationship, if you're close in age, is likely to see you through every stage of life, in a way that perhaps no other relationship will. And I think there's something so special about that, and maybe even sacred about that. And so while like pregnancy and pandemic were happening and making their way into my work in this sort of indirect way, it was the joy of sisterhood and brotherhood that actually plopped onto the page, which is how it usually happens. I mean, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. I find it totally impossible to write about something that's happening in the here and now. I just saw a headline about all of the novels that are coming out in the next year about the pandemic, from a number of writers who I really admire, and I'm really looking forward to reading them. But to me, I could never, I can't, I need decades to say, I have no idea how to write about the here and now and daily life and my reality. I've realized that the characters that nothing that I write is autobiographical, but the characters that I've written who resonate most with me or feel the most like me are always children. And I think it's for this reason. I
can kind of see back to that.
Yeah, I'm just now starting to understand what things in my life meant, 30 some years ago, which is wild. What are your feelings about, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. When you said that, I was thinking about how I find it really difficult to write about a place when I'm in the place. So like when I was living in New York, I was writing very much about Michigan, and now I'm writing something that's partially set in New York, not totally, but I couldn't have written the New York sections the way that I am now, not being there, because there's a certain way of seeing, I think, that does change when you're looking at something with a certain sense of remove, a kind of like awakeness to details you wouldn't have noticed otherwise, or something like that. But I'm interested, the way that you just described that made me really interested in time and how time works in your fiction, but also just like the boldness of like, you're not just setting something in the here and now, you're not just avoiding the here and now, you're like avoiding the recent past and going like super far back. So the book is set between the years, I think the earliest section's like 1903, is that right? And then
I think so.
It's like something like that, and then up through the 50s. And I guess I'm curious about that choice, and like was that also an intuitive choice that kind of just like came from the black box of the brain and you just found yourself there? And what research maybe had to go into that? What were in what ways was it hard, or maybe in what ways was it like liberating? It's something I would be too afraid to do. So I'd like you to tell me how one does such a thing.
So yeah, when COVID hit, I was drawn to historical fiction and started reading a lot of it. I think just sort of escapism. And I was also watching, the TV shows and movies I was watching, like none of them were contemporary. Just
wait, what were they?
What's that show? I'm gonna have to Google it. There's a great show on HBO about a lawyer, set in like the 1920s.
I didn't mean to derail you on a
No, that's okay. Okay, I'm not gonna Google it because I'll go down a rabbit hole. But what I was reading was like Alice Munro, Wallace Stegner, Sherwood Anderson, all of this like beautiful contemplative fiction. So that was definitely sort of, I was absorbing, sort of contextual and cultural elements from that, just from what I was reading. I'm always quite influenced by whatever I'm reading at the time. And then I was doing a lot of just little snippets of research along the way, just, when did radios become a common household item? When did it become more common for women to give birth in the hospital than at home? That kind of thing, when it was necessary to the story. And I think that's sort of the key to how I approached research, was its relevance or, necessity to the story. And for me, the heart and soul is always in character. So I had to kind of keep my focus on character first and foremost, and just sort of let other mundane details go by the wayside, rather than totally immersing myself in that time. If I'm writing a contemporary novel, I'm probably not going to describe like what material a doorknob is made out of, or like the tires on a car. So I'm going to stick to the stuff that inspires me and commands my interest most as a writer. And again, that's always the people. So, I did weave in events that play a pretty big role, the Great Depression and World War II. But it never felt too intimidating to me, as long as I kept the questions really specific and personal and intimate to character. So for example, instead of trying to tackle like, what did this look like as a society? I was thinking, what would it feel like to be Jim Shaw's oldest son, to observe his father potentially losing everything that he's worked for? Would you notice a change in his posture? Would you feel threatened? Would you feel pity for your father? Would you feel humiliated by what was happening? So as long as I, kind of really took a microscope to the characters that I was trying to write and tried to keep that as true as possible, it felt possible to move pretty fluidly through these different eras. But I will say I had the advantage of some very meticulous copy editors and proofreaders who caught some horrifying mistakes.
Wait, like what? Can you share like one really egregious one just to make anyone who's here who's a writer feel better about?
It has to do with electricity and and when that became a thing.
No big deal. No big deal. I found it so there's just something like so energetic as a reader to be in the presence of a writer who is so tuned to character. And in the like your work, actually, it's interesting that you were reading Alice Munro when you were writing this, and I think of Alice Munro when I read you sometimes because there's this like accretion of like quiet moments that suddenly you kind of don't realize how much just specific personness is like building up at you, and then something some detail comes across that just like knocks you sideways. And I'm thinking now of this, I don't think this is a spoiler because we talked about Wendy a little bit, but like Wendy feeling the phantom kicks of her siblings, even though Wendy was never pregnant. It's like suddenly you're just gutted by like the truth of it, and it comes from like the slow build up across stories of all of these intimate perfectly observed moments. But that was just something I love about your work. That wasn't a question. But what I was gonna say is that the movement across time is also exhilarating in a similar way, where suddenly you find yourself in like the 50s and we're with a character who's older. And I wonder if this is going to be a tricky question because it's another sort of structural question, but like, I guess I really want to get back at the, like, did you know you were going to order them? Did you write them in the order that they're in kind of naturally? Or did you say like, look, I need to see Henry older here. Or I need to move a little bit forward more in time here because we've been back in time for like a while? Or was that just like how it came?
I would say in more cases than not, Wendy being an exception.
Yeah.
I pictured the sibling as an adult, and then quickly followed that by writing about that same sibling as a child, and was like, what could be like, a seminal moment in this child's life that would not strike them as such in the moment. Yeah. But and I think in a number of cases they are ordered that way, back to back, as a glimpse of the adult.
Yeah.
And then back to childhood. To me, there's just some for lack of a better way to say it, to me that just worked. The symmetry was nicer. The revelation itself was nicer as to like, who this person is and then why they became that way. It just worked to me better in sort of reverse chronology.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And is like a beautiful way of like kind of, I mean, one thing that's so nice about this kind of format is that you get your, like the question of backstory is like solved in all these like really satisfying ways because you're just always immersed in the present story of like each section, whether you're with an adult version of a character or a child version. I guess another question I have, and this is maybe like sort of a thematic question or just an observation, but there's a lot of sort of beautiful preoccupation in this book with this question of like what we can and can't know about each other, and what other lives are like. Maeve suddenly has this realization that like other people have interiors that look different than hers, and the question of what's going on with their mother, with everyone's mother, what it was really like, what's missing from that story, what they'll never know. Even the opening that you read with the 12 children, this life contained in each lost person. And I guess, that feels like an abiding sort of theme of the book, but I wonder like, if that speaks at all to what interests you as a writer, or kind of what you're awake to in the world when you come to the page with a new idea. Basically, I'm asking you what makes you inspired and where you get your ideas. In a long-winded, very convoluted way. That's really what I want to know.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there are a couple of things that thrill me about fiction, one of which is its ability to navigate the distance between the interior and the exterior in a way that I'm not sure that any other medium can do effectively. And so then to extrapolate that to someone looking at someone else and imagining their interior versus their exterior. But Julie, really, what inspires me is this innate, inexplicable, deeply annoying preoccupation with other people. I cannot help this. I feel that other people's lives are so much more interesting than my own, and I can ruminate on someone else's interior life endlessly. As an example, there's a really lovely elderly gentleman who I often pass in the morning when I'm pushing my kid in a stroller, and until very recently, we'd never said more than hi to each other, nice day out. And then a month or two ago, he said, "Can I just tell you, I just celebrated my 90th birthday." And I said, "That's magnificent. Happy birthday." And I said, "Did you celebrate with a lot of family?" And he just sort of looked off in the distance and said, "No." And
you were like,
Julie, I was consumed by this for days. I still am thinking about it. And, my mind just like spins off in all of these directions. It's very possible that this man is like a total jerk, has treated his family horribly, is an alcoholic, steals money from his kids, cheated on their mom, all that's possible. Or maybe they, all live out of state and were nervous about COVID and didn't want to travel for his birthday, but had like a Zoom party. But in my head,
it all covered. Any of the possibilities.
In my head, this man is a saint, and his children are like they are the self-absorbed jerks who can't even be bothered to remember his birthday and his 90th birthday, and they're just waiting for him to die so that they can sell his modest home that contains his model train collection from his childhood and all these relics of his wife it's just like,
have you written any of it down? Just out of curiosity? It's just all
it's all up there, because this happens far too often for me to take it seriously or pursue it ever.
I mean, it's such a good answer though. It's true, right? Like you have to be obsessed with other people. Like there's no other. I don't really know. I mean, I'm sure there are other ways in for certain writers or whatever, but like that kind of like inherent like nosiness or like I want to look at that or see that or like let me in or just curiosity. Like I don't know. It feels like fundamental to the weirdness of the task. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I know that we were supposed to move to audience questions at 7:40. I have one more question though that I would like to ask. I hope that's okay, Abby and Kendra, if you're listening. Which is, I think I maybe asked you this before, probably like 2 books ago or something, which is like really embarrassing. Two books you have written, and during the time I'm still working on my second and a half. I don't know what you count the thing I threw away. So here's the question. How do you write so fast? Like, can you talk to me about what your process is like? You don't have to like share any secrets or anything, but like, are you sort of like a daily writer? Do you have a word count goal? Do you not approach it that way? Like, what is your practice, I guess?
It's a little hard to answer because it has been different with every book. Chorus probably being the most different because it came up and out so quickly compared to the rest, and less painstakingly. But I think I'm not a daily writer. I don't have word count goals. I used to do that kind of stuff. It just doesn't quite work for me. I think sort of the heart of productivity in general, I have about a year that I can be interested in a book. I've just realized this about myself. That's about it. So I try and, get a first draft up and out in about 4 to 6 months, and then edit that for about 6 to 8 months, and then likely more edits with the help of my agent and editor. But I've just realized that I just lose interest and adrenaline in a project after about a year. And if I fuss around for much longer, it's going to get worse. And so that's kind of in the back of my head. and it just has kind of made its way into my practice. So this is pre having a kid. That throws off everything in terms of time management. Prior to that, I would say on average 3 or 4 days a week, I would write 3 to 5 hours very early in the morning, and then that was it. But then have a lot of time to myself, walking, running, hiking, solitary activity outdoors, to kind of generate thoughts and figure things out. And nowadays things look very different with a kid, but I'm finding, I'll find my way. What I'm finding right now is so much of my time is just spent mindlessly doting on him, that my mind can just travel to what I'm working on. I don't, it doesn't require my full attention to build him a stack of blocks to gleefully knock over 8,000 times in a row. I can be like solving little puzzles in my head. And then when I actually have the opportunity to work, I can really crank. But I don't set goals. I don't know. I just kind of plug away at something until I get swept up in it. And that doesn't happen often, but it happens often enough to carry me through. And I don't know. What's your process in practice, Julie?
I mean, I don't know. Panic, chaos, pain. I'm just kidding, everybody. Sometimes it's like fun and good, and I'm working every day a little bit. I think that's how I like to be, touching something every day. I tend to feel like a deep sense of despair and confusion when I start and stop with a project over and over again. And sometimes the demands of like my working life makes that just like a kind of like hazard of it. It's like teaching. I mean, you teach too, right? Like sometimes
I do, but not very much. I have a really, really light load, and it's usually only one semester out of the year. At the moment, I'm only teaching 6 weeks for this entire year. So
that's great. That's great. So there's a lot of stopping and starting and getting back in, but in an ideal world, I do like to touch something every day. That's just like a little bit better for me. Otherwise, I do think I tend to like get confused and lose interest. But I think it's kind of awesome to hear you talk about finding like a certain like time shape, I guess, for how a project works for you. Like that feels so confident and intuitive and like smart and healthy and good.
Oh gosh,
this is how long it takes, this is how long I need, versus like, I don't know, something more.
I mean, that's very generous of you to say. I envy a writer like you who, is so deeply entrenched in something for a long time, and your work is perfect. And like, I'm curious what your relationship is with past books, because there are many things that I would change about every single thing I've written. And I feel like if I was a writer who could toil at something for 3, 5, 10 years, I have the idea that I wouldn't feel that way about
I think we'll see how I feel about my second book, but I don't feel that way about Marlena. I would change like so many things about Marlena, but I want to make sure let me see. Abby, are you guys gonna hop in to do questions, or okay, hey, I just want to make sure we have time for questions. I actually have like a couple more little things that I could ask too if folks are feeling shy.
Yeah, sure. I do have to say my first question was going to be about process. You literally stole it out of my mouth. Like exactly. I was going to ask like, how has your process changed from book to book? So excellent segue there. Rachel wants to know how you both got so brilliant and beautiful. If you would like to speak to that.
It's Rachel's influence, of course. Proximity to Rachel.
For me, it's Julie's influence.
There is one question that I always like to ask. I'm curious who your dream reader would be for Chorus. Like if you could have anyone like, Obama or Oprah or something, who would it be?
Oh my gosh. Well, this is a funny question because just today I was exchanging a couple emails with my 8th grade teacher. I can't remember. I think I had him for both homeroom and social studies. I can't remember exactly how things worked, but he reached out to me some time ago, and I'm going to be like Zooming with his 8th grade class at some point this week. But he has read all of my books and just sent me the kindest most thoughtful email about them. And, you know, 8th grade is a terrible time of life. And he was such a ray of sunshine then, and I'm sure still is to all of his students. And so weirdly, yeah, you know, sort of personal answer to that question, but it was so meaningful to hear from someone who I didn't know well and don't know well, but so admired. And yeah, just an incredible reader, just gave such care and consideration to what he conveyed to me about having read my books, which was lovely. So I'm going to go with that.
That's perfect. I love that.
Answer.
Someone else would like to know about your favorite character or short story from the book, or the one that's sticking with you the most, which those might be two different things. I'm curious what your answer is.
Yeah, I would say Henry is probably the character that I have the most fondness for. The stories from Henry's childhood, there is an element there that feels quite personal to me. His desire for everything to mean something, and he's so desperate for the world to make sense, and it's just unfathomable to him that there's not one broad sweeping answer for the meaning of life, for lack of a better term. And that's something that I felt very acutely as a child. And what else can I say about Henry? Yeah, I suppose it's that aspect in myself that in part has inspired or informed me as a writer, is that desire to, you know, impose sense on the world. And Henry does not become a writer, but he finds his way, and he comes to find that, you know, his wife is the answer to his life in a way, and a very simple one at that. And yeah, I guess childhood Henry is just near and dear to my heart for the frustration that he feels at the lack of sense that he can make of everything around him. And, you know, I will say, you know, while I think that sort of informs me as a writer, or made me want to write in the fiction in the first place, it's also a terrible pitfall, because, you know, in fiction where everything makes sense, that tends to not be good fiction, because that's not, I don't think, the experience that most of us actually have. You know, the world is chaotic and cruel and weird, and so it's like a constant balance as a writer to to want to make sense of things, but not allow yourself to the extent that it's no longer artful or realistic.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Julie? Did you have a favorite character?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think that's a hard question, honestly. Like, maybe Wendy, which is really a weird thing to say when, Rebecca, you talked about how she was your least favorite character. But there's something, when I think about what sticks with, like, really what has, like, rooted into me, it's probably Henry and Wendy. And Henry's love for his wife, what you just talked about, Rebecca, how simple it is and how whole he feels, kind of compared in some ways to his siblings. And then Wendy, the like sort of like beautiful heartbreak of her life, which I don't think she would maybe call it a heartbreak at all, possibly at moments of heartbreak, certainly, but just how complicated and surprising her story is really moving to me.
We have another question from a reader who is almost finished with Chorus, so no spoilers here. She has a question about the symbolism of the worms in the Christmas tree and the thief who stole all the valuables around Christmas. So sad. She would like to hear from the author. What do these things represent?
Oh no. Oh gosh. Well, I was asked by someone else recently about a different sort of symbolic moment involving animals, not the one at the opening of the book either, but this reader pointed out that I do incorporate animals into many, many, many stories. And the answer to that had to like get teased out of me, but I think there's a sense of vulnerability that comes with, you know, our interactions with the natural world, even when it's something as small and non-threatening as a worm. Suddenly they're everywhere, and disgusting and scary. And yeah, I suppose that's part of the appeal to like writing about the natural world for me, is just kind of the innate fear of being a human.
God, that's like the perfect answer. And I love that we get there from worms. Like, that's amazing. I think to close us out, I would love to hear, you know, work at a bookstore. So always on my mind. What books are you two excited about right now? Please tell us everything.
Go for it, Julie.
I would love to recommend a beautiful book called Chorus by Rebecca Kauffman.
An excellent book.
Just out. Absolutely stunning. Made me cry 4 times. That I can send you screenshots, Rebecca, of every place that made me cry without expecting it. It's such a beautiful book. And then all of Rebecca's other books, which are also so beautiful and exquisite. 2 other things I liked recently that I just like happened to be sitting here. This is getting some mixed reviews. I thought it was delicious and so immersive and good and wonderful, and actually weirdly is like a good companion to Chorus, because it's another like big, have you read it, Rebecca?
No, I keep seeing it pop up in lists and reviews and all that.
It's like a big, juicy, immersive family novel about siblings, and I think they go together in like kind of an interesting way. There's even a kind of like a Wendy-esque character in Rosalie who like takes care of all of her siblings. But I loved it. And I also really liked this, which I feel like nobody's talking about that much. The new Joshua Ferris, The Calling for Charlie Barnes, which is hilarious and funny and meta and weird and surprising and heartbreaking and really good. So those are my recs.
Awesome. I'm reading a book right now. I'm teaching a story out of it and have ended up sinking my teeth into the whole book. But a collection called The Office of Historical Corrections by Danielle Evans. Have you read this, Julie?
Yes.
No, I've read stories from it, but I haven't read the whole thing. I should read it.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. The storytelling is, she just starts stories with a bang and keeps it coming. Just so the way she zip, I really admire. And yeah, the story that I'm discussing with my students right now is Anything Could Disappear, which is a beautiful, beautiful story, and it's a gorgeous collection. So yeah, reading for pleasure is sadly such a challenge these days. I just have so little time to read for my enjoyment. So most of my reading is for business and pleasure, things that I intend to teach. And yeah, it's a magnificent collection. A couple years ago, I think it came out.
It is a really good one. I think it also got optioned for TV, so maybe we'll catch
really
too. I heard something about that. We'll see.
that short story or a different one in the collection?
I want to say it was the novella that's in that collection, which I could totally see as TV. So here's your chance, folks, to read it before it hits like HBO or whatnot. Anyway, now that you all have some reading recs in addition to the wonderful Chorus, I want to thank Rebecca and Julie for joining us tonight. It was absolutely wonderful to sit here and listen to you two talk about process and life and writing, and I am very happy that I got to be here. So everyone, if you haven't already, purchase a copy of Chorus and snap up Marlena, of course, if you didn't catch that when it first came out. And there are links for you in the chat box, or you're welcome to come visit us at RG Julia or BookHampton in store. So thank you again, you two. This was excellent.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us, Abby and Julie. Thank you.
It was so good to see you. Thank you, Abby.
Too.
Thank you, Rebecca.